Okay. Good morning, everyone. And thank you all, and especially our panelists, for being with us this early today, day 9, Nature Day, at COP28. My name is Adonai Herrera Martinez, EBRD Director of Environment and Sustainability.
And I'm Rachel Barza from the Climate Strategy and Delivery Team, lead for climate adaptation and nature finance.
Yes, and this morning we'll be launching the EBRD approach to nature, a review of EBRD's experience in financing projects with outcomes positive for nature, our current work with our partners, and the bank's vision on how to do more for nature. And we will be discussing with our distinguished panelists here their views on the approach, their experience on nature action, as well as how to explore joint collaboration. So let me start with the presentation of the nature approach. We have some slides, but I can start while the slides come up. Well, there's clear evidence of the ongoing nature crisis, and that evidence is undeniable. 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries that define the safety operating space have been crossed. Those are distinguished panelists. That's both of us. That's both of us. We've introduced ourselves, and we have, yes. So 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries that define the safe operating space of the planet have been crossed. For biodiversity, since the 1970s, at least 60% of the wildlife populations have been lost, and services that ecosystems provide to society continue to be grossly undervalued. The EBRD was established in 1991 to support well-functioning market economies, and it's mandated to promote environmentally sound and sustainable development in all its activities. Therefore, addressing the nature crisis and its related market failures is very much in line with EBRD's mandate. In order to scale up nature action, we've developed the EBRD approach to nature. Jointly, Rachel and I have been working on this for quite a bit. Based on the MDB COP26 Statement on Nature, People and Planet and the Global Biodiversity Framework, we have divided action into 3 distinct areas. Protect covers safeguards, the ongoing review of our environmental social policy, and the use of its related tools, such as the environmental social due diligence, to mitigate negative risks and impacts and explore positive outcomes when viable. This is the example of the biodiversity net gains concept, which is mandated by policy when investing around critical habitats and could be explored beyond policy compliance, using exactly the same tools. And now Rachel will elaborate on other actions reflected in the approach. Go ahead.
Thank you. Before I talk a bit about how the bank is going to enhance its investment in nature, I do want to take a moment to recognize some of the challenges we might face in trying to do so and we'll have to overcome. So it's difficult to invest in nature precisely because the market doesn't value it, and that's why there's a crisis. So to create bankable, investable projects based on the value nature provides is challenging because of that lack. So this is not unique to the EBRD. I think we're all facing this challenge, and we might hear some from the panel later about how they're addressing this issue. As a private sector focused bank, the EBRD also faces the reality that a lot of the need for nature investment is landscape scale and often falls in the remit of the public sector and conservation organizations to really achieve that large scale impact. So we, though, have a unique opportunity to deliver real impact for nature by working with our private sector clients to reduce the drivers of biodiversity loss and the harm that human and economic activity can cause. So how are we going to do that? We're going to build on the EBRD's strengths and the work we've done to date already in the nature investment space. We're going to find ways to do more of the activity we already do very well, and also identify new opportunities based on emerging finance models and new green technologies to find innovative ways to deliver the change that we need. We're going to focus initially on 3 different concept areas. So first, blue-green infrastructure. Building on the success of recent investments such as the River Bick remediation project in Moldova through our Green Cities program, we're going to find ways to assess the value that nature's ecosystem services can provide, to find ways of basically quantifying that and using that as a vehicle to invest in natural capital. So the River Lake project provides flood resilience benefits as well as amenity value for the city, and also provides increased benefits for nature. We're also going to look at pollution prevention and circular economy. So looking at examples like our hallmark Northern Dimension Environmental Partnership, which delivered enormous impact in the Baltic and Barents Sea, and the success of which is monitored and verified by the Helsinki Convention, we're going to increase our work in wastewater management and also potentially find that intersection between infrastructure and pollution prevention by delivering more nature-based solutions for wastewater management. We're also going to build on our work for circular economy and looking at ways to incorporate more reuse of materials, as well as more sustainable materials in our investments with our clients. Finally, nature governance. We're going to support our clients to understand their supply chains and the nature risks and impacts within them, working back to primary production for agriculture, forestry, fisheries, to understand how our clients can influence their supply chains positively to create reduced impact on and potentially even benefits for nature. And to make this change, we want to be science-based and data-driven. So to do that, we need to have the data, and that underpins our disclose component of the nature approach. So for the bank, first and foremost, that means understanding what we're talking about. What are we disclosing? And you might see later at this very same pavilion, MDBs have all worked together to align on common principles for nature positive finance tracking. So please come back and hear more about that. We're going to continue that work to better articulate what nature investment looks like operationally. We're also going to continue work to understand and disclose our portfolio and our operational relationships with nature, both the impacts and dependencies that our investments have, and use that information, hopefully, to make better decisions about our projects. For our clients, we're going to provide technical support in the same, supporting clients who have mandatory reporting obligations under, for example, the CSRD within Europe, or who are working to disclose under ISSB standards, whether mandated or demonstrating leadership by undertaking voluntary disclosures and analysis of their operations. And finally, providing a public service using the data that the EBRD already collects. When we engage with a client, we often collect biodiversity baseline data in our analyses to understand the impacts and potential that our projects are having on this project site. We collect that information already, but it could be much better used if collected in a transparent, consistent, standardized manner and shared in a global resource, namely the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. So we're going to provide resources for our clients to standardize the information, to enable them to share that within this facility, to provide greater access to data for everyone who's interested in understanding this challenge. So to do all of this, we're going to need some help. We're going to need to build more partnerships and to work collaboratively, not just with our clients that we're investing in directly, but with academic institutions, scientific organizations, people who really understand the details and the technical experience, policymakers, governments, and of course, donors. So we recognize that because nature's services aren't valued, commercial models might not get all the way to where we need to be to make the change we want to see. So to recognize that, we will be blending concessional finance into our projects and potentially providing credit enhancements or guarantees to make these projects a bit more viable. And with that in mind, hand back to Ed and I.
Thank you, Rachel. And that's a good entry point to conclude. A very relevant example of these partnerships that we aim to establish was launched on 2nd December here at the same COP in the form of the Blue Mediterranean Partnership. Was inspired in the previous partnership that Rachel referred to, the Northern Dimensional Environmental Partnership, and its impacts on the Baltic Sea ecosystem, right? So we thought that replicating that very successful example in a broader blue ecosystem would be core to our region, would be quite interesting. So in a nutshell, the EBRD is already taking the steps to scale up nature action in multiple dimensions, and we look forward to presenting the results in the next COP. So this is our statement of intent, and now we can move on to our panelists who have been kindly waiting here. And I think I can probably take this. Well, I can introduce them here, and then I'll sit down next to Christian. We have Aaron Vermeulen, finance practice lead at the Worldwide Fund for Nature, WWF International. Suzanne Pedersen, Director of the Center for Science and Data at the IUCN, at the International Union for Conservation of Nature. Özlem Müller, who is Sustainability Director at Arçelik Global, which is one of our favorite clients in Turkey. Hoş geldiniz. And we have Christian Spano here, Director of Innovation at the International Council for Mining and Metals, ICMM. So welcome and thank you again for being with us. So let me start asking two generic questions to all panelists. Let's start with Aaron. The question will be the same for all of you. How is your organization supporting the global transition to nature positive? And after reviewing the EBRD approach to nature, how could we work together in that joint effort?
Thank you, Adonai. And first of all, congratulations with your new strategy. I think it will really help if more multilateral development banks start integrating nature in their investment policies. So that's really important. So let me talk a little bit about what WF has been doing and will be doing on nature positive investments. Well, 1 year ago in Montreal at the Global Biodiversity Framework negotiations, together with IUCN and many other organizations, we've been pushing really hard to get this reversing biodiversity loss agenda on the agenda. So now there's a goal to reverse the decline of biodiversity by 2030. That's on top of the goal to protect 30% of the land surface by 2030 as well. So it's a pretty ambitious goal. And then on top of that, in September this year in New York, we launched the Nature Positive Initiative, which is a group of 27 non-state actors, private sector, science-based organizations, and NGOs that are really getting their head around how to translate that reversing biodiversity loss by 2030 into a quantifiable target. So it's the equivalent of net zero, but then for nature. Past 2 years, we've been also working on the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, TNFD, which is an industry-led platform to start helping financial institutions how they can measure their impacts and dependencies on nature and how they can manage these risks, but also how they can seize these opportunities. So WF was one of the four founders. It was launched in the same week in New York at the New York Stock Exchange. And now it's to the sector to adopt that framework. It's a recommendation, it's not mandatory. So the aim is at World Economic Forum in January next month that about 100 financial institutions have adopted that. But still, this is all paper. This is still ambition, right? And we're all talking about ambition, from ambition to action. So what is WF doing to then translate that into action? And maybe it's nice to give you one example. 4 years ago, WF had set up an initiative to start engaging on the promise of blended finance and how to deploy blended finance to nature. And you said it really well. It's really hard to develop bankable projects that have a positive nature impact. So what we did is we thought, okay, how can we massively increase the pipeline of investable projects? At the same time, understanding that the private sector is not right front and center, that they want to contribute to nature, no, they want to produce, they want to make a profit. So what we added to that origination focus is this landscape approach, which was also really mentioned by my EBRD colleague. And with this landscape approach, we will be able to locate a company in a specific geographic situation and then quantify to what extent that particular company is able to reduce the pressures on nature, so the drives on nature, and also to quantify to what extent it's contributing to climate resilience. So we built a consortium with 2 banks and 2 NGOs. We secured 160 million grant from the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. 130 million of that went to our financial partners to deploy in subordinated debt or subordinated equity. And the 30 million went to the 2 NGOs to work with private sector partners in the global south to develop that pipeline. But also the promise was that we would raise a minimum $500 million private commercial finance into these companies. So now we're 4 years down the line. By now we've raised not we, but our financial partners have raised 1.3 billion commercial finance to that initiative. So it's called the dfcd.com. So please have a look at the website. We're going now into the next phase. It will start 1 January next year. And we secured another 14 million from the Dutch government to replenish this origination facility because the finance facility is revolving, as you might understand, to work with many more private institutions in the Global South to really contribute to nature. So I see some questions on your face. So give me one example. We're working in the Atlantic forest in Brazil with a company called Concepta. They're a food processing company that is sourcing nuts and berries from the rainforest in the Atlantic forest. These nuts and berries are sourced and harvested by local indigenous people. So these are then sold to Concepta company that is then selling them to the global food markets globally. So what the loan, it's about a 10 million loan is going to is to build a factory to increase the production and increase the quality of the product of Concepta. WWF and our NGO partners have been working with the local indigenous people to see how can they harvest these products in a sustainable fashion. We've been working with the Concepta company to think about, okay, what would be a fair price for these products. But also we helped the Concepta company to develop the business model, to develop the design of the factory, and we deployed a 250,000 grant to Concepta to actually do that work. So what do we want to do with the EBRD on the future? I think replicate these origination blended finance vehicles more. But you also mentioned we also need to move the financial sector globally. So we are also really keen to work with you in your finance sector to really adopt frameworks like TNFD and also help banks in the global south to integrate nature more in their financial decision making.
Thank you, Aaron. Now we can move on to Suzanne. So, in a nutshell, what is IUCN doing to support the global transition to nature positive, and how could we work together even more? Because we're already discussing quite a lot.
Thanks, Aaron. You can see that IUCN and WWF are closely related. So some of the things that Aaron just said we are working together on, especially the nature positive agenda. It's now sort of the buzzword everywhere, just emulating the sort of pathway that happened within the climate carbon space. But at IUCN, we are very much focused on, let's say, developing the methodologies, the frameworks, the data sets, and the policies and standards for various nature-related activities. So on the nature positive side, we've actually worked quite hard at collaborating with our conservation, let's say, colleagues in the Nature Positive Initiative with TFND on trying to convince also the private sector to really recognize the importance of living nature. So IUCN is very much focused on the living nature part, which is species and ecosystems. So we've actually developed a full-fledged methodology for how you can, in detail, measure your impact on species and ecosystems, because we think at the moment there is a great sort of flurry of discussions and guidance coming out, but the process of really understanding your impact on living nature is poorly understood. So we have sent out for consultation our methodology, which is integrated with the definition of the Nature Positive Initiative. It's integrated with the TFND definition, etc. So we hope that that will end up being, let's say, the pathway for how companies can report and disclose on their impacts. But then another big initiative that IUCN has worked on, and that is actually quite a big success is what is called IBAT, the Integrated Biodiversity Assessment it's plan, and it's about four large conservation organizations that work together to provide access to the core databases of the world on nature, like the Red List of Threatened Species that we own at IUCN, the key biodiversity areas, hotspots owned by uh, BirdLife International. And this is a tool that is specifically designed to the private sector, a tool where they can access data. So if a company or bank or anybody is planning a production site or set up a factory in a particular area of the world, you can access this particular tool. You can get the verified authoritative data on what is known about living nature in that particular site. And then you can get all kinds of fancy spatial maps and, real sort of hardcore data to base your decisions on. And we are really promoting and encouraging, I would say, companies to use this. And I think it's on a really growth trajectory at the moment. So ESG rating agencies, other financing agencies are increasingly our customers as well, because they use it in that discussion with your clients on have they really assessed their potential impacts. So we think we're definitely working hard to both expand the usability, the data sets, and also some of the graphics and so forth, so it can be the place to go. Because what we definitely fear is that there will be a plethora of data out there, that everyone will sort of create and find and use data possibly to fit their own purposes rather than having at least a set of authoritative data. And IBAT is, in a way, four of the key conservation organizations. We are all not for profit, so we don't have any sort of vested interest in making money on it. But it is, of course, something for the public good, but at the same time it's also a lot of work. It is quite hard to fund this sort of development of data and so forth, but this is definitely an area where we can collaborate, is that we can hopefully help to supply the data needed and maybe the understanding of the impacts. And then, for instance, IUCN, having just celebrated its 75th birthday last month, is an old established organization with countries in 60 offices in 60 countries, but also a very strong link with all the conventions, international organizations, and also strong links with indigenous peoples organizations. So we are also increasingly acting as sort of the intermediator between various actors wanting to develop projects, wanting to know more about what's happening, and then we can also facilitate the links to various interest groups as well. I think this is what I would like to say now. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. By the way, we are users of IBAT actually for our environmental social due diligence. So yes, indeed, it's an excellent tool. Now moving on to Özlem, we work with you. Archelic Global is one of the major manufacturers of highly efficient white goods. But what do you do on nature? How do you support that, and how we can work together in Turkey or beyond on nature?
Can you hear my voice? Yeah. By the way, I just want to say that our company is undergoing a major transformation in terms of the company name. So I'm going to call it Beko from now onwards. And I hope maybe you guys know the brand Beko. It's our global umbrella brand. And we are a home appliance company that have like 30 production facilities in 9 countries. Sorry about that. So we are a global company, and in terms of nature, what we're doing is, um, once these frameworks were put in place, like TNFD, or in terms of reporting to CDP, or Dow Jones Sustainability Indices, or these other frameworks in place, such as CSRD or ISSP coming up, um, we did see the fact that we have to have a plan in place and we need to have set a target in place. So when you look at the definitions, being non-net loss or being nature positive, these are actually very demanding for companies in nature. So in order not to greenwash, you do really have to make a statement. So we said we will be working towards becoming a no-net loss company in the first place, and we are going to just list out which risk factors we are facing, which risk factors our operations are causing to the environment in terms of biodiversity and nature depletion. So first and foremost, we are saying we will be working towards being no-net loss. And the second thing is we have one factory in Romania that's very close to an IUCN Red List area called Natura 2000. So we said in terms of biodiversity practices, we're going to start from there. So in Romania, we work with a local company, local consultants, and they checked our factory's biodiversity footprint and what can be done better to enhance. So with them, we started working on the projects and putting in the investment in place. And on top of that, we look at the impact coming from our operations and that of the supply chain. And it seems that water usage and like packaging, these are the two foremost areas that we have the impact in because our operations are already in industrial zones. So it's not like in terms of our production causing GHG emissions and the fact that we're using water in our operations as well as our suppliers using water and us using a lot of cardboard in our packaging. Those were the areas that we thought would create the biggest impact in terms of attacking. So we did set our own targets in terms of packaging, how to eliminate cardboard packaging and stuff like that. And the same target we also set for our suppliers. And this is the part that's actually very challenging because we said we will be monitoring their data in terms of the recycled package that they use. And so that's what we're trying to create. We're trying to increase the recycled cardboard that we use in our operations to eliminate all necessary packaging. And also in terms of water usage, we're doing all that we can to reduce our water consumption and also use recycled water. We have a global target to use 70% recycled water in global operations as of 2030. So there are major focus areas right now. And in terms of working with EBRD, which is a very trusted partner of ours, we are using green loans from EBRD to really go to foster both packaging and water operations as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Sleman. I think we might be brewing a potential project. I'm looking at my colleagues here from business development, Gianpiero and Rachel. So thank you. And last but not least, Christian, what is ISMM doing for driving the global transition to nature positive, and how we could work together a bit more?
Great. Thank you for the opportunity, by the way. I think it's a fantastic panel. Thank you for having us, the mining industry, in the same panel with you. It's an honor. Look, ICMM is an organization that gathers 25 of the largest mining companies in the world. You will find that the likes of Rio Tinto, Anglo American, BHP, Vale, and so on. They represent 30% of the mining market cap, so a fair proportion of that. And they represent 650 sites around the world. I'm giving you these names not to brag, but to say that the theme of nature is extremely important. Those 650 sites are in areas where usually, obviously, resource-rich developing economies, and not all of them developing, always in areas that are going to be linked with fair amounts of land, and many times linked to biomes that are either sensitive or very important to communities and countries. So in a way, mining and nature are linked definitely. Now, if we think about the energy transition and we think about development more broadly, mining will have to grow, and it will have to go faster and more than ever expected. For that reason, our members have been engaging in the last 18 months, all of them, the 25, to understand much better, when we think about nature positive, what do we mean? How that links to mining operations and mining more broadly, what can be done, and what collective kind of position could they have to bring 30% of the market cap and those 650 sites to do what they need to do in terms of delivering nature positive. As a way of bringing more tangible aspects to this, companies like BHP, Tech, Anglo American already have nature positive goals that are publicly available. 12 of our members are actively working with TNFD and piloting the framework. So there is actual work going on. And I want to give you an example that the first time that I heard about it, it was a little bit like let's say, interesting example to share with you. Vale, the Brazilian company that operates around the world, has one of the largest iron ore mining operations in the middle of the Amazon forest. Now, if you take the impact that, or the influence that a normal or average mining operations will have in the landscape, it's around 5%, because mining companies will own a large amount of land and operate in a smaller footprint, 5%. This operation impacts only 1.4%. Now, when you look at it, when you fly with a helicopter or an airplane above this, you see that there is the mine, there's a hole in the ground, there are 411 hectares around it that are not only protected, but that are, you see the forest intact. And right where the area of influence that Vale has ends, it's completely deforested by the agriculture and cattle industry in Brazil. Now, I don't want to come across as this happens always everywhere. We need to make these cases the norm, where we have large corporates with all the lens of international governance looking at them, and operating in a way that not only try to mitigate and minimize their impacts, they manage to create a system that allows nature to thrive. So this is happening today. You could go and visit this operation today. They need to improve in many other ways, but it's a model that we wouldn't think it could exist. I would tell you that there is a mining operation that is one of the largest in the world in the middle of the Amazon forest. Our imagination will go straight into complete deforestation, and this is not the case, at least with that operation in that part. So there are already examples that we can take and we can learn from. We can engage with these players to understand how to work with them. There are $700 billion that we know we need to put in place to get the landscape that we need in terms of investment. And I think the more we can work, and as EBRD have a mining strategy in place that is evolving, and so there is a natural link where really we could play and work together with these 25 mining companies that are actively discussing the topic of nature positive, to think about how to make these $700 billion, how to allocate them in the right operations that are really driving the right model to drive. I want to finish with one thing that I've been hearing, not only in this COP, but in previous COPs, that what we're trying to do is incredibly difficult and challenging. And I would agree with that. I want to tell you that what we have done as humanity, in many aspects, has been incredible and scalable, and has reached sizes that we have never expected. Many times in the wrong things. So we have 62,000 power sites operating around the world. I don't think that 100 years ago we'd have stopped and said we need 62,000 power stations around the world giving us electricity at any point in time. No, it's the wrong electricity with coal-fired powers, but it's the size of that scale is incredible. We have 1.5 billion cars around the world in 20 million kilometers of roads. Again, wrong types of cars. And so when we think about the scale of what we need to do in nature, are we able to deliver scale? Can we do it now on the right things? I think we should think that we are able to do it. We can do it. And it's going to be hard and everything, but we can do it. Collaboration is going to be important, and the framework that we're starting to put together and thinking about is we need to act with urgency, we need to collaborate, and we cannot stop in collaboration. We have to transform. So I'll leave it there, but I'm very positive about this.
Well, thank you, Christian. Thanks for sharing those very interesting examples. Indeed, the EBRD mining strategy was released a few days ago. And the nature agenda is central to that strategy. So basically, replicating the examples that you shared with Vale in our regional operations. So now, following up with two questions that are interrelated. Let's start with Aaron again. From your perspective, Aaron, what are the three key elements that are required to achieve the 2030 GBF targets, and what are the main barriers to that stop that from happening?
Thank you for the question. Well, I mean, as you said, money makes the world go round, right? And now we have to think about how we can make money work for nature instead of against it. So I'll refer to the targets that have been defined in the Global Biodiversity Framework that speak to money. So let me start with target 15, which is about disclosures. Um, well, PNFD was mentioned a couple of times. I'm really inspired by the stories that you share, that you're already engaging on TNFD and testing it how it works for the sectors that you work in. WWF worked with Rabobank, one of the largest agricultural banks in the world, to make a kind of a heat map of their whole portfolio, how they are exposed to nature-related risks. And then we found out that there are actually three areas where most of their risks are sitting, and that's the Cerrado in Brazil on soy. Then you're talking about beef in Australia and dairy in the country where I'm coming from, the Netherlands. So if they would only work with their clients, but also, as you said, in collaboration with other stakeholders to mitigate these risks, that would go a long way, right? So I think taking action on that, not only disclosing, but then also starting to take action to mitigate these risks. Okay, then target number 14 is alignment of financial flows. So it's a bit funny to see that also these 2 weeks at COP, no one is talking about target 2.1C. Does anyone know about that one? That's the most important one. That is, how are we going to align the 200 trillion of this world to the net zero target and hopefully also to the nature target? Um, so what is needed to do that? One is that banks start to once the nature positive target is defined, and you are doing it today with the multilateral development banks, but nature positive will mean something different from private banks. But once that target is clear, they start to develop transition plans and how they're going to transition to net nature positive by 2030. But then also regulators, financial regulators play important roles. So you already see that in the European Union, the European Central Bank is playing a very important role when it comes to nature and climate and how that plays out into financial regulation and pointing at capital requirements for banks that are not on the pathway to nature positive and net zero. Then taxonomies is also very important. The European Union has been playing a very important role on making rules on what is a green investment and what is not a green investment. And we really hope that that will now be complemented with what is a dirty investment. Huh? So it's nice that 5% of your portfolio is green, but how much is dirty? So we really hope for a brown taxonomy as well. And it's really inspiring to see that already 40 jurisdictions have copied this approach from the European on green taxonomy. So there are 40 countries where there are already taxonomies being developed. But then the most important target is target 19, which is about resource mobilization. So how are we going to drive massive amounts of money to the Global Biodiversity Framework's targets? So there's a target set for the public institutions, 30 billion by 2030, but there's another target for the other stakeholders, the private sector, and that's 200 billion, much more. So what is needed for that is, I think the hole that we're sitting on plays a crucial role in that because they can mobilize private capital by providing concessional financial instruments. But then also you might have heard about the MDB reform. So MDBs need to be bigger, bolder, faster, and less bureaucratic, and maybe a little bit more with a bit more risk appetite. Um, so that would be my dream, Adonai.
Thank you, Ron. I think your point on the alignment of financial flows with the objectives of the GBF is essential. And I also think that the transition plans, perhaps as we're doing for climate, so perhaps integrating nature in those climate transition plans and calling them, nature transition plans, including climate, might be one of the key solutions. So now moving on to Suzanne. Suzanne, on data, you were talking about data before. That's your core competence as in your job. Companies might find their role in halting and reversing loss quite daunting, right? To make things worse, confronting the multiple data sources is quite scary for them. How would you recommend private companies to use available data sources for their plans? And why do you think standardized and transparent access to that sort of information is valuable, is important?
Well, I think, as I mentioned before, what we worry about is that there will be a plethora of sources out there that will make it very difficult to compare apples and pears, both from a financial sector point of view, but also, assessing the global status of species or plants and ecosystems, etc. So, yes, we as an institution have really invested a huge amount of money and time into developing data sets. So you may know the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species. We are actually coming out with the next update in 2 days on the 11th, where we will then have comprehensively assessed 150,000 species globally. So we are the authoritative, comprehensive data provider of information about the status of species in the world. But even so, you could say, luckily, GBIF has now adopted a red list for threatened species, red list for IUCN, red list for ecosystems as headline indicators, so that in a way, at least the latest convention is trying to, in a way, streamline also the headline indicators so that certain data sets are recognized by the conventions as being the data set. So right now we have the data sets on living nature, to be sure. Others have it on other data sets. We've also worked a lot on developing standards. So you may have known the IUCN standard on nature-based solutions, which is also a recognized standard, because again, nature-based solutions is also one of those buzzwords that are out there. Everyone is doing nature-based solutions, but what is it and how do you measure it? And are we talking about the same thing? So we are all for collaborating with both the private and the financial sector, because they are really important to mobilize the funds that are necessary to restore and protect nature, but also important that we, in a way, speak the same language and work towards the same goal. So, thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. And I'm glad you mentioned GBIF, the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. One of the actions, and for those of you that haven't seen the EBRD nature approach, one of the actions that we included in that approach that we find as a low-hanging fruit is actually the disclosure, the sharing of our baseline biodiversity data from our projects, or the promotion of that disclosure with the GBIF, right? And we hope that our MDB colleagues will follow suit to truly contribute to treating data like a global public common. So hopefully we'll see the results soon, both in GBIF and in the red list. And now moving on to Oslem, you spoke about BECOS, if Archelix or BECOS interest in biodiversity. What policies or support could be better enable your company, BECO, and other companies to pursue these important projects?
Yeah, thank you. Overall, I would start by saying that, before policies, I think financing institutions need to have figures. They need to put figures in place to assess their clients in terms of their biodiversity or nature damage risk, and that needs to be factored into their financing computations. I think the funds that they flow to these private institutions, I think that's going to make a big difference if you factor in the risk factor for the biodiversity loss, right? So that, I think, is the first one. As you were saying, you were providing that to a portfolio company, right? So they should know about that risk and they should have a number attached to it. I think that's very important because once you do that, then it becomes a way for these companies to really seek that better financing option, so they start doing something about that. I think that's the first and foremost. The second thing would be governments really putting the incentives in place to really push for that. I think, for instance, they're going to collect a lot of money in terms of CBAM or ETS, and some of the funds flowing to that can be used for biodiversity projects as well, or there could be some public-private partnerships, or EBRD saying that, okay, let's have this big project with X or Y government, and let's also put in private players in that. So we need to foster that kind of collaboration, and also disclosures. And what are we about that? Okay, we disclose it. Let's say we are near IUCN Red List and that we are doing this and that. Is it enough? It should be somehow guided, I think. So that's okay. We're going to disclose, but is that really enough to disclose something, or do you need to follow up and do something about it? I think that's the gap that we have right now.
That's a perfect last point as well. And I think I shared this with you. We need people like WWF, IUCN, and give us, if you want, the reassurance, the credibility that our claims are actually credible, robust, right? I agree. So, Christian, last but not least, why is having an agreed standard for nature positive important for the mining sector, and how do your partnerships, how do you partner with organizations like this TNFD or MDBs, and how does that enable ICMM to advance the nature positive goal among your mining companies?
Excellent question. I mean, if we go back to this number of 700 billion a year, every year to be invested in this space, the first thing that we need to think about on the standardized approach is trust. Now, trust is the currency in the financial sector. Now, you cannot do a net present value if you don't trust, the flows in the future. So it's not only a standard, it's a credible standard, one that everybody can actually look at it and say, I believe that this standard is going to lead to something that is deployable at scale. The second thing is to really start to show, and this is why one of the elements that we're discussing actively in our membership is urgency. We need to start, I don't want to use the word piloting. We need to start turning the PowerPoint into reality. That's why we have 12 of our members working on TNFD actively already now, because we need to show how does it look like in practice. One thing is to write something on a PowerPoint or a document. Another thing is to actually do it. And I want to share something that is very personal. We talk about these environmental services and infrastructure as green infrastructure, environmental services. I think we're not making a favor to ourselves when we put them in another category. So my family, when I was from 7 till 21, our business was around a lake. And with a lot of effort over 25 years, we managed to put a business around a lake. Then 3 companies came to the area and depleted the aquifer to the point there was no lake anymore. That happened in 3 years. We went bankrupt. We lost our house. We couldn't go to university in 3 years. Now, if you ask me, that aquifer and that lake was infrastructure. It wasn't green infrastructure. It was clear service, equally as any other service. It was actually the infrastructure had been resilient over millions of years. Now, if you think about the impact in the area, they had to invest millions, if not billions, the local municipality, to replicate and to solve the problem that nature had been providing for millions of years. So the problem is that when we put our category of infrastructure and services as eco service or blue or green, the attention. We need to call them as what they are. They are infrastructure. They provide services that are valuable already. They are much more resilient than whatever we can build as human beings. And so the moment we make it real, the moment we start to work on trust, and the moment we accept that these are infrastructure equally valuable, we will be able to unlock the $700 billion a year.
Can I respond to that?
Of course, please.
Because I really like what you said, but I don't only think that lake is a nature-based solution, but also the company of your family that has been keeping that lake intact is a part of the nature-based solution, right? So if you think about it in that way, it's much easier to invest in nature-based solutions, because if you have companies like yourself that help restore or restore nature by reducing the pressures on nature, it's a part of a landscape approach where you can deploy massive capital to vanilla type of investments companies as long as they respect nature.
Right. Well, thank you, Christian, and thank you, Aaron, for the response. That's exactly what we want, a debate on these topics. Well, yes, thank you, Rachel. Well, thank you, Christian, and all for the participation. And we wanted to give the floor to John Sabet from Business for Nature to speak about nature strategies.
Thank you. Should I? Okay. How much time should we have?
5 minutes.
5 minutes? Yeah. Okay. Good. Thank you. Thank you, Adonai. So I wanted to maybe provide a reflection based on what the panel shared, and it was indeed a wonderful panel, and it's great to hear from all the different angles that we have to take, all the way from the real economy to finance to science-based organizations, conservancy, and others, to actually get to a systemic change and deliver a nature-positive future for all by 2030, which is, as Aaron mentioned, is in the mission of the Global Biodiversity Framework. And so it would be too hard of an exercise, so I think, to pinpoint the different great interventions that we had from the panel, but I'll try to maybe take a step back from the point of view of companies and the way that we approach it at Business for Nature. So Business for Nature is a global coalition of more than 80 organizations, including WWF, and I believe IUCN, but I should have checked before coming, and other organizations from the private sector and other places to engage with companies and financial institutions on nature positive. And because we're a coalition, we're trying to bring some alignment and some high level views on what companies should be doing right now in their specific sectors, but also across sectors, to contribute to the nature positive global goal. And the latest campaign or initiative that we have is called the It's Now for Nature campaign, and it all revolves around having nature strategies by companies and financial institutions. And I think that relates, Adonai, to your point about the transition plans, right? And the nature transition plans. And so we've developed with our set of partners a nature strategy handbook that is supposed to help the companies understand from a high level what are the different key actions they must be taking and how to develop credible and ambitious nature strategies that they can then submit for review. And if they meet several minimum requirements, they can join that campaign that will help us for COP16 both create further incentives for other companies to develop their nature strategies by bringing that attention to them, but also help the governments and the policymakers have that extra confidence that, yes, companies and financial institutions are moving, and therefore we can keep having ambitious regulations in place. And so as part of the nature strategies, and to take a quick step back from everything we mentioned, there are 4 high-level actions that we believe are absolutely indispensable. These are to assess your impacts and dependencies on nature, to commit with smart targets, specific, measurable, ideally science-based targets that relate directly to your material impacts and dependencies, not 1% of your operation somewhere deep down. Smart targets that directly relate to your key impacts and dependencies. And then to have a plan of action, right, to transform your operations, to transform your business model, to actually deliver those targets. I love what you said about from PowerPoint to practice. That's exactly the idea, right? So just targets that are out there but are not being actually achieved or worked upon are not helpful. So we want to see an actual plan of action. And that plan of action, this is the last criteria, has to be approved by the C-suite or ideally the board of the company. And so these are what we see as the 4 key actions. And then this is where you need the data sets that we mentioned. This is where you need the methodologies, the SBTNs, the TNFDs. You need the alignment with the financial sector, blended finance. All of these solutions that we've mentioned, I think, come in. But that will also make, I think, the life of the financial sector that much easier, if we have credible and ambitious nature strategies from companies that can be structured in that way. So that's a little bit of the angle I could provide from the business for nature standpoint. Thanks for having me on the panel.
Stay there. Thank you, John. Now I think we finished the panel. We finished the discussion. Are there any questions from the audience? Any questions? We have a bigger audience at that beginning. No questions? If not, just very quickly to whoever wants to respond. You've reviewed the nature approach, the EBRD nature approach, right? In your view, what is the entry point that we described there that holds the largest opportunity for truly scaling up nature finance? You know, Rachel described it before. We've spoken about blue-green infrastructure, pollution prevention, governance, net gains. In your views, yep, go ahead. 2 respondents, that's perfect.
So we were having this conversation before the panel around trying to find blueprints that can be used as examples. I'm sorry. So blueprints that already exist that are in the right direction, that are not small pilots, but actually operations or forests, or, can we create a catalog of examples of where we can see the framework already working, approaches where we could replicate to sink the $700 billion that we need. For example, the case of Vale in Brazil, when we think about, we're talking about Congo or even other places in the world, can we look at the example of Vale, think about how to optimize it, work with Vale, and think about, is that a model that can be evolved and then applied, With obviously recognizing that different places are going to be different. But I think the conversation was, if we start from scratch, from PowerPoint, it's going to take us forever. Let's build on, in the white goods industry, in the automotive industry, in the mining industry. Where are these blueprints that we can learn from, improve, and expand? Build from what already we have some muscle. I don't know if that's more or less the conversation that we had.
So you basically are talking about scalable pilots. Yeah. Basically, not so much about the theme, but about the channel, to be able to pilot projects that then can be replicated at large, at mass.
There is a problem with, I mean, this is a almost philosophical conversation of biases. Pilots are usually related with things that are still tested. I think that we have a lot of cases that are already close to what we need and are already reaching scale. So can we understand where they are? What do they need to do to go to the stage that we need, and not start from a small pilot? I don't know if that makes sense.
So replicating the example of Vale elsewhere, perhaps working together in the future. Suzanne, you wanted to say?
I was just thinking earlier in my career, I was responsible for a lot of investment preparation projects in the energy sector for EBRD or EIB and so forth. And I think if I look at, let's say, the influence EBRD had in terms of really forcing well-developed, well-crafted project preparations and really setting very strong standards and then solid, bankable projects coming out of it. You should definitely really strive to do the same in the sort of nature-based sector. And I think possibly the wording you put into your structure was a little bit more vague and less ambitious than what I've seen, let's say, in the energy and climate field. So I think you should use your power actually to not only, let's say, influence, but also you do have the money instrument. You're not going to grant the money unless those targets are being met. So be more bold and ambitious, please.
Yeah, that's bold works well. You cannot imagine how much negotiation goes into a paper like this. John, I think you found inspiration.
Yes, that's exactly right. Inspiration, because I'm not a finance guy. But just to go back to the point we mentioned, when I hear that 160 million from the Dutch government led to 1.3 billion of investments. I think, wow. And I think blended finance is definitely something that we should look into and use that pilot to scale and go to other governments and develop that. And a sub part of that is something that I hear a lot in the finance community and about aligning financial flows towards nature is all the reflections around biodiversity credits. Now that's a very complex, difficult subject that we won't be able to completely unpack right now. But I feel like potentially if we get the credits right, and I'm speaking with a lot of care and tentatively, potentially what I've heard is that also the stacking of the credits. So right now, you invest in a solution, you invest in mangroves, you get carbon credits. But that ecosystem, that biome is already also providing benefits for water filtering, for biodiversity, for the migrating birds to actually have a place to stop. It's providing also marine life benefits, etc. So potentially, if we manage to get this right, I feel like this could also help to get to the exponential levels, the trillions, as you were saying.
Spot on.
Today, we are pre-launching the first global assessment of the mangroves as an ecosystem. And unfortunately, we're coming out with results that about 50% of mangroves will be submerged in 2050 due to sea level rise, to degradation, to this, that, and the other. So we really need to, let's say, use the knowledge we have and, of course, the assessments we do in a way that we not only protect, but also find ways to, in a way, price these things better.
Thank you, and this is great to have this discussion. It's fantastic. I agree with you, John. The creation, the establishment of economic incentives that drive nature positive action is probably the most important element in the work we do, especially in the work that MDBs can do, because hardly you get compensations from nature action. So creating those markets that would encourage investment probably is the most important point we need to collectively work on. So I think we've come to an end. We still have, we haven't reached 211, but that is good. Thank you everyone for your participation. I don't know if there's any question from the audience. Any other question? If you don't mind. So we can leave it here. Let's please thank our panelists for being here this morning. Thank you very much. And looking forward to working with you in mobilizing nature action. And certainly for me, I will be working with Rachel. So you know where to find us. Thank you.